Oh, and welcome to Glasgow Rangers Nation with me, your host, Owen, guys, bringing you your team every day, bringing you Glasgow Rangers every single day, guys. And if you want your team, if you want your daily fix of Rangers, you need to hit that sub, ring that notification bell, set it to all so it always springs up as a reminder on your mobile device or on your computer. And you won't miss out on any of the daily content, the daily news videos, the breaking news videos, the podcasts, the live streams, all that content, all for the price of nothing. Zero, zilch, not asking you for a single penny, guys. And if you can hit the like on this video, that would really help out. So we've got a lot to get through this morning in terms of news. See the game today, later today against Hearts, 7:45 kickoff at Ibrox under lights, which is going to be a fantastic atmosphere, no doubt, especially after the announcements that were made yesterday as regards players leaving the club. More of that to come, obviously. We've also going to talk about Michael Beale and his press conference yesterday, a very detailed press conference talking about a number of different things. We're also going to talk about the game, obviously, a few transfer bits and pieces, lots to get through, and let's get straight on with it. So let's first talk of the situation yesterday where it was named where 5 players will be departing Rangers. And obviously those 5 players were named as Scott Arfield, Alfredo Morelos, Alan McGregor, Ryan Kent and Philip Helander. I think from those 5, the only one that really caused a little bit of surprise maybe was Scott Arfield. It was obviously strongly rumoured that he would be getting a 1-year contract, a further year contract. Now, Michael Beale did explain in his press conference why Scott wasn't getting that 1-year contract. And, it was, I think, very much a mutual decision, obviously, between the club and between Scott. And obviously, Scott will be saluting his way out of the club this year. And obviously, we'll miss that fantastic celebration, as well as all those different, those fantastic goals that Scott has scored down the years, particularly against that lot from across the city. Who can forget that semi-final goal, for example, or the one where, he breaks through the middle and scores a fantastic goal against them at Ibrox. Now, obviously, there's news regarding him, and I'll be bringing that up when I talk about Michael Beale's press conference. A number of very experienced stars leaving the club, and going back to that display of stars. Obviously Philip Haaland obviously has been unlucky this season, missed an awful lot of time with injury. Obviously has not played at all this season. He's only played 35 games for Rangers due to his injury problems, and obviously the situation with obviously the bones in his foot and the issue where apparently he has some sort of strange medical problem with that. I don't understand it myself, but that's what Michael said. Ryan Kent and Alfredo Morelos, who in the past have been absolute superstars for Rangers, but quite clearly have flattered to deceive this season. Ryan in particular has disappointed, and I think Ryan will be the first to admit that this season has not really gone as he would have wanted it, particularly with it being his last season at Rangers. Alfie as well, I think has suffered from injury this season, has at times not performed as well as he should have done. And I think, like Michael Beale said, has lacked a little bit of energy. But obviously, Scarfield and Alan McGregor, very different cases this year. I think with Alan, it's just been a case of the fact that he went on a season too long, that those years have caught up on Alan, and we know that. But I think we've got to remember the best times. We've got to remember the positives with those 5 players. Well, obviously, Coach Michael Beale spoke to the media today ahead of the game against Hearts at Ibrox tonight. Now, it's always great. Michael Beale always seems to be, someone who will give you quite a lot in those news conferences. I feel at times that perhaps he could give a little less. You watch some of these more experienced managers and head coaches, and they're very clever at not saying a great deal, but giving just enough to keep the media satisfied. And I think that's something obviously that will come with time for Michael. Now, what did Michael Beale have to say at this press conference? Well, first of all, the first thing that was brought, obviously, was the situation as regards those 5 departures. Obviously, we did talk about arrivals as well and transfers. I do have some more news about him, about Jack Butland. More Butland news coming in later on in the video, so hang on for that. So what did Michael Beale say? Michael Beale was asked to sum up the contribution of the 5 stars who are leaving Rangers this summer. He said, obviously, individually excellent, but as a group, they have been fantastic quality for the club and will be obviously leaving a huge hole in terms of experience in the squad. First of all, obviously, he talked about Alan McGregor. Alan McGregor, as he said, Alan McGregor is Hall of Fame goalkeeper. He has been a fantastic servant for the club in 2 spells that he's had for the club. Obviously, he did go away and play for the likes of Hull City, for example. He's had some great moments, pulled off some fantastic saves for the club, and has been a superb servant. And many people may argue that Alan McGregor is probably the second greatest goalkeeper in Rangers history, after probably Andy Gorham. I'd personally put Chris Woods in there. Chris Woods is a big personal favourite of mine, but Alan has been a wonderful servant for the club. Now, yes, it can be argued that Alan has gone on too long. Perhaps he shouldn't have played this season, but Michael Beale was exceptionally complimentary about Alan. And of course he's going to be, he's not going to come out at this time when there's players that are announced to leave and say anything negative about those players, is he? Next, he went on to talk about Filip Helander. He said, obviously, Philip's been out injured for an awful long time, and that's been a shame for him. He said he was a massive signing for the club, and his partnership with Connor Goldson was certainly one of those that helped be the rock that they build that league win on when they were invincible. And I think the little sneaky dig at that lot from across the city, which was nice from Michael Beale. I think he is getting those little digs in now and early, ready for next season. But Filip Helander certainly was an exceptional defender when he came to the club, even though I think at times he was obviously a player who had got that injury history that held him back from going on to be perhaps as talented as he should have been. Obviously, next he talked about Scott Arfield, and Scott Arfield was someone who was brought up an awful lot in this press conference, and I think Scott is someone. I posted a couple of videos yesterday here on this channel and on the TikTok, which we have as well. We obviously now have a TikTok as well for this channel. All the details are scrolling on the bottom of the screen now, the places you can find us on social media, and there's a lot of Rangers fans who would have liked to have kept Scott Arfield, who wanted to keep him, who love Scott Arfield, and he seems to be absolutely loved. And I love Scott Arfield. I think he wears his heart on his sleeve. He is a Rangers man through and through. Now, he said, obviously, of Scott Arfield, he says this was one that pulled the heartstrings. Michael said, he's a fantastic man, a fantastic person. He's adored by the fans, adored by players. He said it was an amicable parting of the waves, and it was more over playing time. He said Scott needs, Scott wanted reassurances over playing time. Scott wants to start. Scott, I think, wants to perhaps get a few more games in before he finally calls it a day. And I think that was an assurances that he couldn't give, Michael Beale said. So it was a very difficult decision it came to when obviously deciding to allow Scott to leave at the end of the season. Next, obviously, was a mention, obviously, of those two in particular. Talk of Morelos and Kent. Of Ryan Kent, he said that Ryan had great contributions, particularly to big games in the past. And he said, obviously, this season has not gone perhaps as Ryan would have wanted it to, which I think is somewhat of an understatement, really. Ryan has had a very mixed, shall we say, season, if we're being diplomatic here. There was the moments, perhaps, at Easter Road early in the season, the 4-1, later in the season, the 4-1 win, where he was very good indeed. But there was other times where Ryan was very poor this season. And I think that culminated in when he was hooked at half-time in that semi-final of the Scottish Cup against that lot from across the city, and when he was subbed for tactical reasons. Now, giving you manager speak there, tactical reasons means you're rubbish, get off. So I think that's probably it. Alfie, he said, has made an outstanding contribution to the club. Obviously, Euro top goal scorer. And when he came to the club, obviously, he was obviously a third choice striker. But, he came, he established himself. He obviously became very important and has certainly, for a lot of Rangers fans, become somewhat of a cult hero. And for a lot of Rangers fans, especially of the younger generation, become their first real hero, their first real role model for the club. He talked obviously a little bit obviously about each of those players and talked, very favourably about them indeed. He said, obviously, this home game would be a time when the fans would get to show appreciation for those players. He thinks things obviously are going to change. Things will be changing in the future. And I think that's obviously what Rangers fans wanted. Now, one obviously question that he was brought back to was surrounding Alfredo Morelos and Ryan Kent. And he said, he was asked by one journalist, have Alfredo and Ryan ever been offered new contracts? Now, he said, obviously, he couldn't speak of what had happened before November when Ross Wilson and Gio were in charge. But certainly since he came in November, he said no contracts had been offered. to Ryan and Alfredo. Not ever offered deals was his exact words. He said, obviously, that since he'd been there, he said the season was not going well when he came in. And he said this season's quite clearly not been Alfie's and Ryan's best seasons by a long way, shape, or form. I think obviously very honest again from Michael Beale and very correct as well. This season has not been a good one for either Alfie or Ryan. He was asked obviously about the fact there's now places to fill in this squad. He said obviously yes. Michael said yes, there are big gaps to fill now. He said this gives us opportunities. He says there are important players going to be coming in. He said, and this was a really interesting point for me that he put in. He said he didn't want players to have shadows. Now that was a very interesting thing that he said. And I think again he said that he wanted the players to come in and not have to check over their shoulders, or he said he wanted those players to have the confidence that they were the main players for the club. There was no one in the background. There was no one from the past shadowing them, and no one from the past sort of arching over them at any point. I think that's what he's getting at when he says that, which is very interesting for Michael Beale to say. He's obviously asked about the new signing, which he rumoured that will be unveiled on Wednesday or on tonight against Hearts. He said obviously that that he didn't reveal a name again. He didn't give anything away. It is felt that signing will be Kieran Dowell, who is out of contract, and now this championship season in England has finished. Obviously, will be allowed to move as he is obviously out of contract. He said that a lot of things were going on in the background. And he said that as fans and the media would start to see announcements now been made, he said it was very important. He felt to do this in the right way, and this was the right way to announce the departures before any signings. He said obviously there are 2 games to play. He said, and obviously the fans will get their chance against Hearts tonight to show their appreciation for those departing players. But then there would be announcements made for new players coming in. Obviously, a very respectful way to those former players, giving the players a chance to get their respect, to get what they deserve before obviously new signings are announced, doing things the right way, which obviously this club is very famous for doing. He was also asked about Scott Wright and John McLaughlin and the chances of them moving on. And he didn't really commit to that. He said he had discussions with a few players as towards their futures. He talked about obviously the fact that players had talked about getting minutes, about first team football. He said it was not right to name names, and he wouldn't directly name any players or particularly talk about John McLaughlin and Scott Wright. But it is felt that McLaughlin and Wright will leave this summer. That is one strong rumour that is coming out of the club. Scott Wright has been linked with a move to the Championship, and John McLaughlin obviously is someone who currently second choice goalkeeper, but if someone is brought in as another goalkeeper, more on that, but the news is coming up. He could be forced further down the pecking order, so may well want to move on. Again, he was asked about Scott Arfield, and he was asked about the situation. Was there ever a discussion had about keeping Scott, and did he want to keep Scott? And he said, Michael said, selfishly, yes, I did want to keep Scott for myself and for the club. He said, but he said that Scott felt that he needed to feel involved. He wanted to start games. He wanted to get more minutes. He wanted guarantees over minutes. And he said that was something that he could not give Scott Arfield, and that was why the decision was taken by both parties to part ways and for Scott not to take a new contract at the end of the season, which I thought was very interesting. Obviously, that Scott obviously wants to get more minutes, wants to play a little bit more, wants to start games, and obviously something that he won't be able to do at Rangers, especially given the influx of new stars that is probably going to come over the summer. He said obviously he was asked about how many players leave will start against Hearts. He said obviously they hadn't made any decisions yet as to the squad for the Hearts game. He said obviously he talked a little bit about how he would select the best possible team for that. He said that that he couldn't make any judgments at this moment in time, especially as there was players returning to training. He then went on to say that Borna Barisic, Alfredo Morelos, Antonio Cholak, Scott Wright, Rabbi Matondo and Glenn Kamara had all returned to training that day. But again, he couldn't make a commitment. He said that it had only been 20 minutes in and he needed time to assess the players. He said he did need time to look at them and look at who was ready to go. But obviously, in the fact that Morelos and Cholak are back gives us more forward options, something we haven't had in the previous games, where Fashion Sakala and Robbie Matondo have had to start up front against Aberdeen, obviously then Fashion up front in the Hibs game at the weekend. Michael Beale did say that he would rotate, as 3 games in 6 days was far from ideal. He mentioned in particular John Suter, who obviously was not used to that at this stage, given the fact that he has had a lot of time out injured. Obviously, turning to the Hearts game, finally mentioned about the Hearts game late on in the press conference. He was asked, obviously, how this was a meaningful game for Hearts. He said, obviously, it was a meaningful game for Rangers as well. And Rangers had, talk about Rangers had 12 to 13 players out at the weekend, but still put in a very strong performance that he was pleased with. He also talked about the fact that Rangers are unbeaten at home this season in the league, and he wanted to maintain that. He said that had only happened recently in the season they won the league, and he wanted to continue with that unbeaten home run. He talked about the fact that any first team that he picks will have strong energy. Was that a bit of a veiled hint that Alfredo Morelos would not be starting, given the comments that he made in the past about Alfredo's energy in recent games? He did talk about the fact that he was going to pick a team to win the game. That was his intention. The fact that, yes, there were 2 games left, and realistically, Rangers have got nothing left to play for. They will finish second in the league. They can't challenge Celtic for the league title, but at the same point, he did want to make sure that Rangers finished as strongly as possible. He was then asked about the number of players going out and players coming in. He said, obviously, there's 5 going out. Was there a ballpark number of numbers of other players going out at this point? Michael joked that he needed players to coach, but he wasn't going to get rid of the entire squad. He said, but no, there is no ballpark figure. But he did explain that decision, saying that he wanted to reduce the squad size to re-energize and to reduce the age of the squad. He said that he wanted to have a squad that was reduced to increase intensity, because he said that now we've got 9 subs in the league and more in European football. He said he wants to get it so that everybody feels close to that first team, that everyone feels that they're in with an opportunity to play and not 100 miles away, which I think is a decent attitude to have. Sometimes when you have a big, massive, huge squad, you can kind of lose track of certain players, and certain players become disheartened with their opportunities. So I think Michael is very right in that. He was also asked about Malik Tillman. He said however, Rangers were no further forward with Malik, and it was still, obviously, as he had previously mentioned, 50-50. He said there was a call planned with Malik for next week, and hopefully there'll be perhaps more news from that. He did, obviously, then was asked about Alfredo Morelos and his place in Rangers striker folklore. He said that he praised Alfredo and talked about the fact that hopefully Alfredo would be remembered fondly. He talked about the fact, he was also asked about the fact that had he been starting to be thinking about a replacement for Alfredo, and he did say that he'd been thinking about that since November. He said, obviously, good strikers cost a lot of money. He says, but however, we have done a lot of thinking around this, and we are a good way along in our thinking. So is that perhaps a hint that in terms of striker targets, Rangers are very clear on who they want, on identifying those targets, on buying those targets? Certainly that is to be one that is to be hoped. I think, given the rumours surrounding Antonio Cholak as well, that he may not be here next season, then maybe you need to bring in about 3 strikers for Rangers this summer. So hopefully there is a clear plan there in place for the 4 strikers and who they will bring in. One player who has been linked, obviously, as well as Madjan Pirou, is Kristovic, who plays in the Slovenian league or Slovakian league. I don't know which one it is now. He scored 26 goals this season. His season has just finished. However, it is thought that his club want 5 million for him. Now, whether Rangers will be willing to pay that is obviously up for discussion. However, Michael Beale did say today in that press conference that, you do have to pay a substantial fee for a striker. So is that opening the door to say that Rangers would be willing to spend that money on a striker? Who knows what that means? That is clearly what Michael was talking about. In terms of the Jack Butland, we are there now, the Jack Butland news. Michael Beale has talked about that and was asked about that. And Michael Beale did say this was obviously to written media rather than actually in the press conference to visual media. He said that it was not as close as everyone was making it out to be, and what they were saying in the media was a bit of a wild goose chase. So is it in fact the fact that the Rangers don't want Butland and Butland is not going to come in this summer? Who knows what stage that deal is, but it certainly seems that he's not as close as many media outlets have been suggesting recently. And like I've said in multiple videos, we won't know, I don't think, who is actually signing until they're actually stood, you know, at Auchenhowie or outside Ibrox with a flag, so with a scarf above their heads and wearing a shirt. It is all rumours, and we are going to be linked, you know, given the fact that they know, that media know that Rangers provide good clickbait, provide good interest, and also the fact that Rangers are a club that are clearly rebuilding and looking to build a new squad. So yes, we'll be linked with multiple players. So that is going to make good storylines. It's going to make good column inches. They're going to write it, and they're going to make stuff up, and they're going to take any rumor and push it up a little bit further and sensationalize it to try and draw us in and get that clickbait. So obviously that's something we need to consider. Well, guys, that's pretty much it for this morning. Obviously, you know, we are building towards this game later on, 7:45 kickoff at Ibrox under the lights. It's going to be absolutely amazing, guys. Time to say farewell to those 5 players who will be moving on. So what have we got coming up? Well, obviously there's a live stream tonight coming up before, so we'll be going live before the game, bring you team news, to talk about the game, obviously then bringing you the game. So please come and join me for that live stream. And then obviously tomorrow, Thursday, we will be bringing you a podcast, myself and Victoria, to take apart the game, but also to talk about those 5 players who are departing Rangers at the end of the season. Well, guys, thank you so much again for watching Glasgow Rangers Nation. As always, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking to you, my fellow Rangers fans. Remember, all the places you can find Glasgow Rangers Nation have been scrolling along the bottom of this video. You can find us on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok. You've got our email address there. You can also buy us a coffee. It's on the ticker. So please, obviously, you know, have a look at us on social media. Thank you so much for your support. It has been phenomenal, guys. Absolutely phenomenal. We are the people, and I will be back to speak to you very soon here on Glasgow Rangers Nation.